It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For days, the palace had tried to keep the matter buried under careful wording, closed doors, and the kind of silence that usually means something far bigger is unfolding behind the scenes. Catherine and William had reportedly been called into a private discussion with medical advisors, a meeting so guarded that even routine staff were left outside the usual channels. No public statement followed, no cheerful clarification came, only whispers. And then came the detail that changed everything. The concern was connected to Princess Charlotte, not in a way the palace wanted discussed, and not in a way anyone was prepared to explain. Those close to the royal household began to notice the shift almost immediately. Aides who normally offered small reassurances suddenly had nothing to say. Courtiers who usually dismissed rumors with quiet confidence became careful, almost frozen. Catherine, known for her composure even in the most difficult moments, was said to have left the room pale and deeply shaken. William, usually measured and controlled, was later described as being unusually protective around Charlotte, staying close in a way that made palace observers realize this was not ordinary family concern. It was something heavier, something that had unsettled even those trained to show no emotion. But the strangest part was not the medical concern itself. It was the timing. Because just as questions about Charlotte's well-being began to spread, another secret started surfacing from inside the royal world, a secret tied not to illness but inheritance. A private legacy, a buried royal possession, a piece of the past that had been kept away from public eyes for decades. And according to insiders, Charlotte's name had quietly appeared at the center of it. That was when the story changed from concern to shock. Media insiders began claiming that something was off for weeks. But no one knew whether the silence was about Charlotte's health, Catherine's fear, or a much deeper royal decision being prepared in the background. The palace had hoped to control the narrative. Instead, the silence only made it louder. Because once Charlotte became linked to a hidden inheritance from the Queen Mother, the entire matter took on a new meaning. It was no longer just about a child being protected by her parents. It was about a young princess being pulled into the ancient machinery of royal legacy, where love, duty, history, and power often collide. But the chilling truth wasn't just about Charlotte's health, it was tied to a royal legacy that had long been buried until now. For decades, one royal possession remained untouched, unmentioned, and almost forgotten by the public. Locked away from cameras and hidden from curious eyes, it carried secrets that stretched back to another era of the monarchy. Few knew it still existed. Even fewer knew who had been chosen to receive it. The diary was not spoken of like an ordinary royal keepsake. It was treated as something heavier, something almost sacred, because it carried the private thoughts of the Queen Mother through moments that shaped the crown itself. Inside those handwritten pages were said to be memories of family duty, quiet fears, historic ceremonies, private disappointments, and the kind of royal truths that never appear in polished public statements. It was not a jewel that could glitter under palace lights. It was not a title that could be announced in a formal line. It was a record of what the monarchy had spotted and perhaps what it had carefully hidden. For years, royal archivists were believed to have guarded the collection with unusual care. The volumes were reportedly kept away from casual access, preserved not because they were beautiful, but because they were dangerous in the wrong hands. Every royal generation leaves behind public history, but private diaries are different. They carry emotion. They carry judgment. They carry the small details that can change how people remember the powerful. And that is why the Queen Mother's diary became more than paper and ink. It became a silent witness. What made the whispers even more explosive was the belief that the diary had never been meant to disappear forever. Sources close to the old royal archive tradition suggested there had always been quiet conversations about who should one day inherit its meaning. Not simply own it, not display it, understand it. The person chosen would need patience, loyalty, and a deep respect for the crown's burdens. For a long time, many assumed that choice would remain with senior royals, or vanish into the protected world of palace records. But behind the silence, another possibility had begun to form: Charlotte. Her name reportedly emerged not as a careless gesture, but as part of a deeper royal calculation. She was young, yes, but she represented continuity in a way few others could. She was the daughter of the future king, the sister of another future king, and a princess growing up under the careful guidance of William and Catherine. To some inside the palace, that made her more than a child in the line of succession. It made her a living bridge between the monarchy's past and its future. And once that idea took hold, the diary was no longer just a hidden object. It became a message, a signal, a choice that suggested the old Windsor legacy was being passed not toward influence, not toward ambition, but toward duty. That was the reason the silence around it felt so charged. Because whoever received the Queen Mother's private diary would not simply inherit memories, they would inherit trust. And when the chosen recipient's name finally surfaced, shockwaves immediately spread through royal circles. Many expected the treasured diaries to remain within the hands of senior royals. Others assumed they would disappear into the royal archives forever. But the decision that emerged stunned even longtime palace insiders and left some family members quietly questioning everything. Charlotte's name did not arrive in the story by accident. It came with weight, timing, and a strange sense of purpose that many inside royal circles could not ignore. For years, she had been seen as the quiet strength beside her brothers. A young princess raised not only with privilege, but with discipline, duty, and an awareness of the family she would one day help represent. William and Catherine had carefully protected her childhood, yet they had also shaped her with the same values that once defined the older Windsor women: patience, composure, loyalty, and an instinct for service before self. That was why the comparison began almost immediately. Some insiders reportedly saw echoes of the Queen Mother in Charlotte's steady presence, not because of age or rank, but because of temperament. The Queen Mother had understood that royal power was often not loud. It did not always sit on the throne. Sometimes it stood beside it, quietly holding the family together when pressure threatened to break it apart. And in Charlotte, certain palace figures believed they saw that same early promise. A princess who could one day become a stabilizing force, not by demanding attention, but by carrying history with care. William and Catherine's influence was impossible to ignore. They had spent years presenting a different kind of royal future, one built on controlled dignity rather than public chaos. To them, the diary was not a trophy. It was not a symbol to be waved in front of rivals. It was a lesson in what the crown costs behind closed doors. If Charlotte was to receive anything from the Queen Mother's private world, it would not be vanity. It would be responsibility, a reminder that legacy is not simply inherited. It must be protected. Behind palace walls, discussions around the transfer were reportedly careful and intense. Archivists, advisors, and senior family voices were said to have weighed the emotional meaning of such a decision. Could someone so young carry the shadow of those pages? Would the public understand? Would older royals accept that a child, rather than a senior figure, had been chosen as the future keeper of such private memory? These questions did not disappear. They deepened the tension, and when word began moving through the family, reactions were mixed. Some reportedly saw the choice as beautiful, a sign that the monarchy was looking ahead instead of backward. Others viewed it as a quiet shift in royal favor, proof that William and Catherine's children were becoming the center of the institution's emotional future. That was what made the decision so powerful. Charlotte had not been handed a crown, yet she had been given something almost as delicate: trust from the past, placed directly into the hands of the future. Yet while some celebrated the decision, one person reportedly viewed it very differently. The moment the news reached royal residences, the atmosphere reportedly changed overnight. Conversations became guarded, meetings became longer, and behind closed doors, questions began circulating about how such a significant decision had been made without wider consultation. For Camilla's circle, the news was not simply surprising. It was unsettling. The Queen Mother's private diary was not a decoration, not a sentimental object to be quietly passed down without meaning. It carried symbolic weight, the kind that could shift perception inside the royal family without a single public announcement. Whoever was trusted with those pages would be seen, by some, as part of the deeper inheritance of the crown. And that was why Charlotte's name caused such a sharp reaction. Reports suggested that those close to Camilla had not expected the decision to move so quietly or so firmly. They had believed, perhaps wrongly, that anything connected to the Queen Mother's private memories would remain under senior control, locked safely within the old archive system, or handled by adults who already stood at the center of royal life. Instead, the diary was now tied to Charlotte, a young princess whose future was still unfolding, yet whose place in the monarchy's emotional story was growing stronger by the day. That was where the tension began to harden. The Queen Mother had long represented endurance, tradition, and the survival of the monarchy through storms that might have broken weaker families. To connect Charlotte with that legacy was to suggest that the future of royal memory was moving toward William and Catherine's line with unmistakable force. It was not loud. It did not need to be. In royal life, the quietest choices are often the most powerful ones. Behind closed doors, discussions reportedly turned delicate. Some wondered why Camilla had not been brought into the process earlier. Others questioned whether the decision had been shaped by William and Catherine's growing authority over the next generation's image. Palace factions, already sensitive to every sign of favor, began reading the diary as a message. Not a spoken message, a symbolic one. A reminder that royal legacy does not always follow rank in the present. Sometimes it follows trust in the future. For Camilla, the sting would have been personal as well as political. She had spent years securing her place beside the king, moving from outsider to queen with remarkable force. Yet this decision seemed to pass over influence and reach directly toward Charlotte. It placed a treasured piece of old royal memory not in the hands of the current queen, but in the path of a child shaped by Catherine's values and William's future reign. That contrast was impossible to ignore. And as speculation widened, one question became impossible to silence. Was this diary just an inheritance? Or was it a warning from the past about who truly deserved to guard the crown's most private truths? But what made the diary truly explosive wasn't its value, it was what many believed could be hidden inside its pages. As whispers about the diary spread, attention shifted from who received it to what it might contain. Some believed it held nothing more than personal reflections. Others suspected it preserved details that could reshape how certain chapters of royal history are remembered. That was the danger of a private diary. It did not need to accuse anyone openly to become powerful. A single memory, a single judgment, a single carefully written line from a woman who had lived through royal crises could carry more force than any official palace statement. The Queen Mother had seen the monarchy survive scandal, war, family wounds, and public doubt. She had watched crowns tremble, loyalties break, and old rules bend under pressure. If her diary held even small pieces of those private thoughts, then it was not simply history. It was evidence of how the royal family truly understood itself. Speculation began moving quickly. Some wondered whether the pages included reflections on family divisions that had never been fully explained. Others believed the writings might reveal how the Queen Mother viewed duty, marriage, succession, and the painful sacrifices demanded by royal life. Historians, naturally, were fascinated, not because the diary promised gossip, but because private royal writings often expose the emotional side of decisions that public records turn cold. Behind every ceremony, there is fear. Behind every title, there is pressure. Behind every smiling appearance, there may be a wound no one outside the palace ever sees. And that was why Charlotte's connection to the diary became so meaningful. If the pages contained lessons about survival, restraint, loyalty, and the cost of protecting the crown, Then the young princess had not merely received a family object. She had been handed a map through the hidden corridors of royal duty. The diary could show her what public life never teaches clearly, that the monarchy is built not only on crowns and carriages, but on silence, endurance, and choices that break the heart before they strengthen the institution. Public curiosity only grew as more commentators began questioning why such a private possession would be linked to Charlotte at this moment. Was the diary meant to prepare her for a larger emotional role in the royal future? Was it a symbol of trust from one generation of royal women to another? Or was it, as some whispered, a quiet warning that history remembers everything, even the things families try to bury? That question made the atmosphere heavier, because once people began imagining what the diary might reveal, Camilla's reported shock took on a sharper meaning. The issue was no longer whether Charlotte had been favored. It was whether the past had chosen her as its keeper. And in a family where memory can be more dangerous than power, that possibility was enough to unsettle everyone. The more people discussed the diary, the clearer it became that Charlotte's inheritance was about far more than a collection of old notebooks. At just a young age, Charlotte suddenly found herself connected to a piece of royal history unlike anything her generation had experienced before. It wasn't a jewel, a title, or a palace. It was something far more personal and potentially far more powerful. For Charlotte, the diary represented a responsibility no child could fully understand at first glance, yet one that the palace believed she could grow into with time. Her public image had already begun to shift from simply being the beloved daughter of William and Catherine to something more layered. She was becoming a symbol of grace under pressure, a young royal watched not just for charm, but for signs of strength. Every appearance, every calm gesture, every moment beside her family seemed to deepen the belief that Charlotte was being quietly prepared for a meaningful place in the monarchy's future. William and Catherine understood the weight of that better than anyone. They knew that royal history can inspire, but it can also burden. To give Charlotte access to the Queen Mother's private reflections was not to rush her into adulthood, but to place a protected flame near her path. It was a way of saying that duty is not learned in one grand moment. It is absorbed slowly through example, discipline, and the stories of those who came before. That guidance became central to the transfer. Catherine, shaped by years of scrutiny and quiet resilience, reportedly viewed the diary as a lesson in emotional strength. William, carrying the future of the crown on his shoulders, understood it as a bridge between generations. Together, they were believed to have approached the matter not as a reward for Charlotte, but as a sacred trust. The diary was not meant to make her feel important. It was meant to teach her why importance can be dangerous without humility, and that was where Charlotte's maturity became part of the wider conversation. Public admiration for her had grown because she often appeared composed beyond her years, steady in moments when royal life demanded control. To those watching closely, this made the Queen Mother's diary feel less like an accident and more like a careful act of preparation. The monarchy had always survived by teaching its children early that their lives belonged partly to history. Charlotte was now learning that lesson through something deeply personal. Still, the responsibility was heavy. The diary carried memories, warnings, and perhaps emotional truths that even adults would struggle to hold. It connected Charlotte to a line of royal women who had suffered silently, endured public pressure, and protected the crown even when it cost them privately. That was the contrast that made the story so powerful. A young princess receiving not glamour, but gravity, not privilege, but purpose. And as this understanding grew, so did the pressure around her. Because if Charlotte was being trusted with the past, people would naturally begin asking what role she was being prepared to play in the future. But while Charlotte embraced her growing role, the debate surrounding the diary was only beginning. What began as a private family matter had now become one of the most discussed royal stories in months. Reporters chased answers, commentators offered competing theories, and the palace found itself struggling to contain a narrative that was expanding by the day. At first, officials appeared to believe silence would protect everyone involved. But silence has a strange power in royal life. It does not always calm a storm. Sometimes it feeds it. The less the palace said about Charlotte, the diary, and the private transfer, the more the outside world filled the empty spaces with suspicion. Every carefully worded denial, every vague comment from unnamed sources, every refusal to confirm even the smallest detail made the story feel larger than it had been before. Royal experts began weighing in with competing interpretations. Some argued the diary was simply a private family heirloom, passed with affection and trust. Others saw it as something far more serious, a signal that Charlotte's future role was being quietly strengthened, while the monarchy prepared for another generation of change. Commentators across Britain began asking, why this diary, why Charlotte, and why now? Those three questions became impossible to ignore because they reached beyond the object itself and into the heart of royal power. Public reaction was just as divided. Many admired the idea of Charlotte being trusted with something so personal from the Queen Mother's world. To them, it showed that the young princess was growing into a role shaped by dignity, family, and quiet strength. But others questioned whether such heavy symbolism should rest on a child's shoulders. Was Charlotte being honored, or was she being pulled too early into the complicated politics of the crown? That question gave the story its emotional edge. Inside the palace, efforts to maintain privacy reportedly became more intense. Advisors wanted to protect Charlotte from becoming a public battlefield. William and Catherine were said to be determined to keep the focus away from drama and back on family. Yet the more they tried to shield her, the more the public saw her as central to the future of the monarchy. The diary had turned her from a beloved young royal into a symbol of continuity, and symbols are difficult to control once the world begins interpreting them. The tension surrounding Camilla's reported reaction only added fuel. Every discussion about the diary seemed to reopen questions about legacy, influence, and who truly carries the emotional inheritance of the House of Windsor. Was the current queen being sidelined from a deeper royal memory? Was Charlotte being elevated by forces older than modern palace politics? Or was the monarchy simply reminding everyone that its future belongs not to those who demand recognition, but to those quietly prepared for duty? By the time the story reached its peak, the palace was no longer facing a simple question about a private diary. It was facing a public conversation about trust, bloodline, memory, and the next shape of the crown itself. And as the noise grew louder outside palace walls, one final revelation threatened to change everything. In the end, this story was never really about a diary. It was about trust, about legacy, about who is chosen to carry the memories of those who came before. And for many watching closely, the decision spoke louder than any official statement ever could. The Queen Mother's private diary had become more than a hidden royal possession. It had become a symbol of where the monarchy believes its deepest memory should go next. Not toward the loudest voice, not toward the strongest demand, not even toward the person with the highest present status. Instead, it moved toward Charlotte, a young princess whose future is still unwritten, yet whose place in the royal story now feels impossible to ignore. That was the quiet power of the decision. It did not need a palace balcony or a formal decree. It carried its meaning in silence. For William and Catherine, the diary represented something painfully delicate, a way to connect their daughter to a past filled with duty, sacrifice, and private strength. They knew that Charlotte would one day need more than public admiration. She would need roots. She would need examples. She would need to understand that royal life is not built on applause, but on endurance. The Queen Mother's words, whether full of warmth, warning, grief, or wisdom, could offer Charlotte a kind of guidance no modern briefing could ever replace. That is why the reaction across the family felt so charged. Some reportedly saw the transfer as a beautiful act of continuity, a passing of the torch from one royal woman's memory to another's future. Others saw it as a quiet shift in influence, a sign that the emotional center of the monarchy was moving more clearly toward William and Catherine's children. And for Camilla, who had fought for years to secure her place at the heart of the institution, the symbolism was impossible to miss. The diary had not gone to power. It had gone to promise. That contrast gave the story its final force. Status can be granted, titles can be announced, positions can be defended. But legacy is different. Legacy chooses its keepers through trust, through patience, through the belief that someone will protect what others might use. Charlotte's inheritance was not about possession. It was about preparation. It suggested that the monarch, even in silence, is already thinking beyond the present tensions and toward the generation that will one day carry the crown's emotional weight. And perhaps that is why this moment struck so deeply. A young princess receiving an old diary may sound simple from the outside, but inside the royal world it spoke of memory, loyalty, and the invisible decisions that shape history long before the public understands them. One day, Charlotte may read those pages and see not just the Queen Mother's past, but the beginning of her own responsibility. And perhaps one day, she may write the next chapter herself. Because long after titles change and generations pass, it is legacy, not power, that ultimately defines a royal future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.